Has anyone ever told you that you were the problem, just to avoid blame?
She made me tea and said, "Let's not dwell on the past," as if years of manipulation, betrayal, and quiet cruelty could be wiped away with one line and a steaming cup set carefully in front of me, and for a second I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Because if there was one thing I knew with absolute certainty, it was that she had never let the past go, not when it benefited her, not when she could still twist the knife, not when she could still sit in the center of attention while I was pushed to the edges like some unwanted reminder of everything she wished I wasn't. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched her hands, how calm they looked, steady as she placed the porcelain cup on the table as if this was just some innocent attempt at reconciliation, and I thought back to all the years of smiling lies, of little setups that always left me looking like the unstable one, the bitter one, the one who couldn't move on. Growing up, Amanda had this way of making everything bend in her favor, like gravity itself worked differently when she was around. If there was a boy I liked, she had a way of making him notice her instead, then tossing me a sympathetic smile that was anything but. If there was money set aside for me for a school trip or later, for college, somehow it always disappeared, and when I asked about it, Mom would sigh and explain that Amanda needed it more, because apparently her emergencies were real, and mine were just inconveniences. By the time I was old enough to stand up for myself, the pattern had been cemented so deeply that even when I pointed it out, I looked like the problem, like the jealous sister who couldn't stop bringing up old grievances. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular when she stood in front of the entire family, telling this hilarious story about how I had almost flunked out of my sophomore year, and she twisted it into this running joke about me being the struggling one, the creative soul who never quite figured things out. Everyone laughed, of course, because she had that gift of making cruelty sound charming, and I sat there, face burning, trying to hold my tongue because I knew if I snapped back, I would be the one who ruined the holiday. That was Amanda's genius. She never hit directly, always sidestepped just enough so that I was left holding the anger, and she was left holding the smile. So when she looked at me across the table and told me not to dwell on the past, I knew exactly what she meant. She meant forget every time she had stolen something from me, not just things, but opportunities, dignity, relationships. She meant forget the way she had gaslighted me in front of Mom so many times that even I started wondering if I was crazy. She meant forget the betrayals she never admitted, but always justified. And more than anything, she meant forget that she had never once said she was sorry. What she didn't realize, what she had never realized, was that I had stopped waiting for her to apologize a long time ago. I no longer expected her to take responsibility or show remorse. I knew her too well for that. Instead, I learned to watch, to anticipate, to stay 3 steps ahead in ways she didn't expect from me because she still thought of me as the younger sister who trailed behind her. So as she pushed that cup toward me, her lips curling into the kind of smile she wore when she believed she had the upper hand, I looked right at her and I thought, "You think I'm still that girl, don't you? You think you're still in control." The tea smelled faintly sweet, almost too sweet, and maybe another person would have brushed it off, but I had lived my entire life picking apart Amanda's moves, noticing the details she thought no one else saw. I didn't lift the cup. I let it sit there while she chattered on about how family was all that mattered, how Mom hated it when we fought, how we were adults now and should act like it. I let her perform the role of the peacemaker because I knew that was the image she loved most, the magnanimous sister who forgave, the one who rose above petty squabbles. And I let her think I was buying it, nodding here and there, my hands folded loosely in my lap, while inside me, something colder and sharper than anger was already moving into place. I didn't tell her then that I had already seen through her before she even set the cups down. I didn't tell her that this time, it wasn't going to play out the way she expected. I just kept my voice level, my face calm, and I thought, as I reached slowly toward the table, that the past she wanted me to forget was exactly the reason I knew what I was about to do. And as she slid the cup a little closer, waiting for me to take it, I already knew I was not going to drink from it. Because this time, I wasn't going to be her victim. This time, I had my own move prepared, and she would never see it coming. I sat there with the cup in front of me and the words, "Let's not dwell on the past," floating in the middle of the table like a dare, and while she waited for me to nod and perform the role of the grateful sister who finally learned to be reasonable, I let my mind walk back through all the small cuts that never healed, the times she used charm as a crowbar and our mother as a shield, the months I spent patching holes in my credit because she decided that borrowing without asking was a form of love, and the years when every complaint I voiced was reframed as moodiness or jealousy until I started saying less, not because I forgave her, but because I learned that silence was the only way to stop feeding the story she preferred. There was the semester I lost my housing deposit because the money that had supposedly been put aside for me simply did not exist when I needed it. And when I asked how that was even possible, our mother gave me the soft lecture about family emergencies while Amanda stood behind her with that bright, consoling smile that was never for me. And later that night, I found out she had used the funds to float herself through a stretch between contracts, which sounded almost responsible until I looked at the dates and saw the same week full of restaurant charges and a weekend trip she called networking, and when I brought that up she lifted her hands and said I always took things personally, as if the facts were a mood I could switch off. There was the job I almost didn't get because someone forwarded a rumor to the hiring manager that I was unreliable, and I recognized the phrasing immediately because Amanda had used it on me for years. The little tag she liked to attach to my name whenever I was inconvenient, and when I confronted her she laughed and said I was paranoid. Then posted a nostalgic collage about sisterhood on social media with a caption about forgiveness that collected a pile of hearts, and our mother sent it to me as proof that everything was fine, which was the moment I realized that being right would never matter here as much as being louder and shinier, so I stopped trying to win arguments and started quietly collecting receipts. I began keeping copies of messages, saving screenshots, filing confirmations, and freezing anything with my name on it so nothing could be opened in the dark while I slept, and I taught myself to stop signaling my plans because she had always depended on a tell. Some little tremor in my voice that gave her the cue to move first, and when I finally reversed a sketchy card she had opened with my middle name misspelled, I did it without announcing it, without staging a scene, just filing the right reports, sending the right letters, and waiting until the bank's language shifted from maybe to certainly, and she called me in a sudden rage about a hold that embarrassed her at a checkout line. And I let the silence breathe until she ran out of swearless insults and hung up on me, then texted that she loved me and that families stick together, which I knew meant she was regrouping. So when our mother asked me to come by for tea because Amanda wanted peace, I said yes, not because I believed in her peace, but because I was finally ready to stop pretending that the past had been a misunderstanding we could fix with a hug. And I set up my day accordingly, canceling anything that would split my attention, forwarding a copy of my file to a hard drive in case my phone vanished again, and arranging a simple failsafe that would trigger if I didn't check in after our visit, not because I expected the worst, but because experience had taught me to respect possibility, and I walked in with a small, steady calm that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with being done with surprises. Amanda chatted as she moved around the kitchen like a friendly host in a sitcom, telling me how much she had grown, how therapy had taught her to stop spiraling, how she understood now that we both made mistakes. And when she put the cup in front of me, I caught that faint sweetness that did not match the tea she had described, and I filed that detail away without letting it change my face. Then listened as she pivoted into a tidy speech about holidays and how Mom worried that our bickering would ruin the season again, and I said that nobody wanted that, and she said, "See, this is maturity," and I almost smiled because it sounded like a line she had practiced in the car. What I did not tell her, as I folded my hands and nodded, was that an hour earlier I had reached the end of a very patient process with a fraud investigator who had spent the past few months unwinding a string of charges in my name that dated back to the year after college, and that the final step had cleared that account out from under her like pulling a rug without touching the furniture, and I had asked for the confirmation to arrive during the window of our tea on purpose, not to be dramatic but to anchor myself to a moment that would not depend on her agreement, and when my phone buzzed on the table with the email I had been waiting for, I glanced at it once. then looked back at her and said, I think it's a good day to stop borrowing things that don't belong to you, Amanda, which she pretended not to understand until I added that the card in my middle name was finished and that the calls she would be getting were not from me. Her smile flickered, the way a light does when someone flips the wrong switch, and she blinked hard and said that we were here to be civil and that I was making it hostile, and I said I was perfectly calm and that civil had nothing to do with silence. And while she picked up her cup and told me family should not act like enemies, my phone buzzed again with a second confirmation that the last disputed charge had been reversed, and I felt something straighten inside me as if a knot had finally loosened, and I leaned forward and said, if this is your definition of being civil, tell me exactly what we are being civil about. Amanda did not answer my question about what exactly we were being civil about. She only pressed her palms to the table as if she were blessing it, and said in that polished voice she saves for company that civility begins when everyone agrees not to dig up graves. And while she was busy drawing a delicate frame around our conversation, I was replaying the last few weeks like a highlight reel in my head. The hesitant text she sent to our mother asking for a sit-down, the sudden cheerfulness in her follow-up messages, the insistence that she would host and would take care of everything so that all I had to do was show up and be open, which, translated out of Amanda's language, meant that she wanted control of the setting and the props and the timing, because she always does her best work when she's the one handing out the cups. She started into a speech about how none of us were perfect and how mistakes had been made on all sides, and I noticed how she spread responsibility like peanut butter, thick enough to taste, but not specific enough to nourish. And when I asked which mistakes of mine she wanted to discuss, she waved a hand and said, no, this is not about blame. This is about healing, which would have sounded generous if she had not been the same person who, a year ago, forwarded a screenshot of my private message to a cousin with a note that said, see, she admits she spirals, and then told me I was imagining the harm when I confronted her, after which our mother, loyal to peace no matter the price, suggested I should be less sensitive. And I remember thinking then that my sensitivity had become the family's favorite smoke detector to unplug whenever dinner was burning. The cup sat between us like a polite dare, giving off that sweetness I still could not place, a little floral, a little fake, and when I asked what she had used she brightened and said a new blend, sugar-free and better for everyone. And I smiled by habit even as another file opened in my head, the one labeled with a year in which I landed in urgent care after a catered office lunch where a dip had been doctored with almond extract that I had clearly said I could not tolerate, and the way Amanda shrugged afterward and said I made a big deal out of nothing because the label said natural flavor, and she had always been the high priest of natural if natural supported her plans. I am not a woman who enjoys paranoia, but I am a woman who learns. And my body has always been a quick study when the lesson is what not to swallow. Our mother drifted in with that hopeful smile that looks like a truce flag, saying how nice it was to see us together and how proud she was that we were taking the grown-up route, and Amanda moved immediately to pour her a third cup while narrating our progress. The way a tour guide points out landmarks that do not actually exist, and I watched the coordination of it, the timing of the praise, the easy performance of tenderness that has always bought her credit in this house, and I thought, if civility is a script, then today I will improvise, because following her lines has only ever led me to the same lonely places. So I asked for water, not to be dramatic, but because I wanted my head to stay clear, and when I said it, Amanda laughed lightly and told me I have always been particular, which is the kind of comment that seems harmless until you notice how it plants the idea that your boundaries are quirks, and I said that clarity is useful and watched as she opened the fridge and handed me a chilled glass. And I wondered if she believed the gesture would make me set down my guard the way a tip makes a server. Pretend the diner's rudeness never happened, and I took a long drink anyway because the water tasted like nothing at all, and I needed that flavor. She made another pass at reconciliation, this time suggesting we do a small toast, a symbolic first sip in unison to mark a new chapter, and she lifted her cup and waited for me to mirror the motion. And in the window's reflection I saw our mother hovering just enough to catch the shape of it without risking the content, and I had one of those quick private flashes that feel like a headline only you can read, something that said this is the moment she planned for. The exact choreography where she leads and you follow, and I thought about how many times I had let her set the rhythm, and how often I pretended not to feel the tug, and I decided that if we were finally writing a new chapter then I would pick the punctuation. I raised my cup, felt the heat touch my palm, and said that a new chapter deserves a clean page, then reached across the table as if to straighten the napkin under her saucer, a small fussy habit she often calls my need to control the mess. And while my hand moved the napkin, my fingers closed around the base of her cup with the same gentle care she had used when she set it down, and I slid hers toward me and mine toward her in one smooth, unhurried motion that looked like tidying and felt like truth. And when she blinked and said nothing, believing perhaps that she was still directing the scene, I took another drink of water for balance, set the glass down without a sound, and waited for her to lift the cup that was no longer mine. She lifted the cup that was no longer mine with that bright hostess smile that always makes people forget to look at her hands, and as she tipped it toward her mouth with our mother watching for harmony like a referee desperate for a draw, I felt the smallest click inside my chest, a private green light I had been waiting on for longer than I care to admit, because if there is one thing I learned growing up in this house, it is that the moment you accept the other person's framing, you have already lost the scene. So I kept my face open and neutral and even a little grateful while she took that first sip and made a show of appreciating the blend she had selected specifically for my taste, which would have been sweet if the sweetness had not carried that faint chemical perfume that always tells me there is a trick riding under the sugar. It happened fast in the way rehearsed accidents sometimes do, a tiny intake of breath that turned into a swallow that turned into a cough she tried to smother with her fist because she hates looking messy. Then a second cough that built on the first until it dragged her whole upper body forward, and I could see the moment she realized she had lost control of the performance, because her eyes shot to mine as if I would rescue the lines she had forgotten. And when I did not move except to take a measured drink of water that tasted exactly like water, she reached for her throat in that panicked universal gesture that makes everyone in the room forget what they were about to say. Our mother gasped my name as if I had the manual for this, which in a way I did, because there is a certain practiced clarity that arrives when you have lived too long with people who treat danger as a rumor, and I placed my glass down carefully so it would not clink, then told her to step back and give Amanda air while I watched for whether this was a bad swallow or something more structural, and in that instant 3 different histories braided themselves together in my head: the office lunch, where a mislabeled dip sent me to urgent care while Amanda rolled her eyes, the holiday dessert with the natural flavor that shut my throat while she said I should relax, and the long pattern of little experiments she ran on me under the banner of fun or forgiveness or family, each one filed in my memory not as a scar but as a reference. Amanda tried to speak and only managed a harsh, whistling exhale that made our mother step forward with a trembling napkin like fabric could solve it, and I said softly that a napkin would not help and that this is not about crumbs. Then reached into my bag without hurry and set my injector on the table next to the saucer in a way that was almost polite. Not because I wanted to be theatrical, but because I needed the room to understand that I came prepared for only one throat to close today, and that throat was not supposed to be hers, and I do not think I will ever forget the look that crossed her face when she registered what I had placed within her reach, a look that had shock in it, yes, but also a flash of calculation, the arithmetic of blame already arranging itself behind her eyes. Our mother asked me in a voice that sounded like a whisper dragged over gravel whether I was going to do something, and I said that I was, and that step 1 was identifying what we were treating. Because there are reactions you do not medicate the same way, and there are triggers that do not respond to the same solution, and while I spoke I lifted the lid of the little ceramic sugar jar and found it clean as a showroom, which told me she had prepared the space for a story that required no evidence, then glanced at the tiny glass bottle by the kettle, a boutique syrup with a handwritten label that would photograph beautifully, and I let my gaze move past it as if it were nothing at all. Because I am old enough now to know that sometimes the most useful record is the one you give the other person the chance to create. Amanda made a strangled sound that might have been my name and tipped in her chair, knocking her own phone to the floor. And I saw the screen light up with a preview banner that looked a lot like a delivery confirmation from a vendor whose products align very neatly with my medical file. And I had the absurd urge to laugh, because even at the edge of her stunt, she had wanted the receipt to arrive on time, and I said her name once, evenly, the way a teacher does when a student is 2 seconds from setting off the fire alarm, then told our mother to call 911 and put the phone on speaker so I could hear the questions. And while she fumbled with the dial, I leaned forward and slid the injector a little closer to Amanda's trembling hand without quite touching her, a gesture that read like mercy and felt like evidence. She mouthed something that could have been help or could have been please, and I answered in the same calm tone I use when I am showing someone where to sign, telling her that I would help and that I always help. And that before I do, I want her to tell her mother what she put in my cup, because I would very much like us all to be civil about the truth for a change, and when our mother, still not processing, asked me what that meant, I met her eyes and said it means there is a difference between moving on and moving past what actually happened, and that we were about to decide which one this family believes in. The dispatcher's voice came through the speaker asking for symptoms and timing while Amanda clawed at the collarbone she has spent her life decorating, and I answered clearly and concisely, because clarity is a kindness, then took the injector in my hand and held it where she could see it, not to taunt her and not to bargain, but to make the next moment honest, and in that little pocket of time between one breath and the next, with our mother staring like she had finally heard something she could not unhear, I asked the quiet question that would either end this or change it forever, and I asked it in the softest voice I have, which is the one I save for the truest things. Do you want me to save you before you tell her, or after? For a moment that felt short on oxygen and long on history, she stared at the injector and at our mother, and at me as if the three of us were doors, and she could not remember which one opened. And when I repeated my question in the same even tone, asking whether she wanted me to save her before she told the truth or after, she gave the smallest nod and forced out a rasp that sounded like yes, and then, pressed by the weight of our mother's eyes and the dispatcher's voice on speaker, she croaked the word almond, adding that it was concentrated and that she had mixed a little into my cup because she wanted to prove I still overreact, because she thought a scare would make me softer, because she was sure it would be mild and controllable and would finally show everyone that I am dramatic and she is the steady one. I did not deliver a lecture, because lectures are for people who still believe they can sell the room on a version of events that collapses on contact with facts, and I did not barter, because bargaining is for people who are still chasing the illusion of closeness that costs them air. I simply pressed the injector where it needed to go and counted slow breaths with the dispatcher until the medicine started to work, watching the panic loosen its hold millimeter by millimeter while our mother stood with both hands gripping the edge of the counter like she could keep the world from sliding off it if she held on hard enough, and when Amanda's chest stopped shuddering and the sound coming out of her throat turned from tearing to ragged, I told our mother to unlock the front door and guide the paramedics straight in. They arrived quickly, because the station is close and because luck finally handed me one clean inch, and I stepped out of their path, answered their questions with the kind of shorthand that makes professionals trust you, then turned to Amanda when one of them asked what she had taken and whether it was intentional, and she said the word again without the bright showmanship this time, adding that it was a mistaken judgment, not malice, and the medic wrote that down without looking up. Then asked where the substance was, and I gestured to the boutique bottle with the handwritten label by the kettle that she had bragged about earlier. And he bagged it with practiced economy while the other medic checked her airway and blood pressure and told our mother that she would be transported for observation whether she wanted the embarrassment or not. At the hospital, they kept her long enough to be safe, and they kept us long enough to be honest, and when the attending asked to hear the history, I gave it without embroidery, then handed over the delivery confirmation that had flashed across her phone during tea, and the time-stamped notes from 911 that captured her admission verbatim, and the physician's eyebrows did not move much, because professionals see everything eventually. But his tone changed in that way professionals have when The story arrives with proof, and he said the chart would reflect exposure rather than mystery, and that a statement would be taken because statements close doors that chaos likes to keep open. By evening, the family group thread that has always been her favorite stage lit up with vague declarations about grace and unity and misunderstandings, and I did not perform a victory lap or a sermon. I wrote a single sentence that said she is stable and the facts are with the hospital and the call log. Then I muted the noise and sent a small folder to the few people whose opinions reached my kitchen, a folder holding the screenshots, the receipts, and the careful ledger of what I have stopped allowing, and I did it without rage because rage is hot and brief while boundaries are cool and permanent, and I slept for the first time in months without waking to check whether my name had been used like a spare key. When she was discharged the next afternoon, she sent a long message about trauma and intention, and how she never meant harm, and how she hoped I would not weaponize this against her, and I typed and deleted several drafts before sending the only reply that mattered, which said, I am done being the place where you test your lessons, and if you want a future with me, it will be a future where you never again touch anything I consume, and never again borrow anything that bears my name, where you send a written acknowledgement of what you put in my cup, where you reimburse the fraudulent balances that were reversed for me by professionals rather than by your apologies, and where every conversation that involves money or health happens with a third party present. Our mother called that evening to ask whether I felt victorious, and I told her victory is not the point, that what I feel is clean, a steady cleanliness that comes from choosing not to be rewritten, and I said I would see her, but only in places where Amanda is not staging the scene, and that if she cannot accept that boundary, she is choosing her peace over my safety, and I will not argue with her choice. And after a long pause, she said yes in a voice I have heard only a handful of times in my life, the voice that belongs to the woman she might have been if noise had never learned to dress itself as truth. The truth is, this was not a movie twist with a poisoner and a hero so much as a long refusal to keep playing by rules that guaranteed my loss, yet I will admit there was a sharp satisfaction in watching the plan close neatly, in hearing her say the ingredient on a recorded line, in feeling my own breath stay smooth while she sat exactly where she had prepared a seat for me, and if there is a moral here, I am not interested in polishing it, because I did not set out to educate the room. I set out to stop letting the room educate me. Weeks later, I met our mother at a diner that has nothing to do with our family's habits, and she ordered tea for herself and water for me without asking because learning, even late, is still learning, and she said she was sorry for mistaking volume for truth. And I said I was willing to build something smaller and sturdier, and we sat in a silence that did not sting, and when I went home I opened my cabinet and lined up my plain mugs and thought about how a single switch at a kitchen table ended years of switching in the shadows, and how, when my sister finally tried to teach me the same lesson she had rehearsed on me since we were kids, she learned that I had already graduated because I had picked my own cup, my own proof, and my own ending. And I was calmly drinking water.